This is the fourth and final panel in the Department of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies 2019 Social Justice Speaker Series. Thank you all for joining tonight's conversation. So while I'm reading my introductory remarks, I would ask that the attendees take to the chat and make sure that you have clicked on panelists and attendees so everybody can see what you're doing. And I'll just ask that you share your name, where you're joining us from, and what is your interest in tonight's topic. Okay, so while you're doing that, let me say thank you to the co-sponsors. Thank you to the Anne Braden Institute for Social Justice Research, the Commonwealth Center for the Humanities and Society, the Graduate Certificate in Diversity Literacy, the Departments of Pan-African Studies, Philosophy, Political Science, and Sociology, the Women's Center, and Phi Sigma Alpha. We're grateful for the work of WGST Chair Dawn Heineken, Administrative Specialist Jen Rayburn, Brandon Harwood here in the call, who's been helping with tech in the Commonwealth Center. Let me acknowledge my fabulous colleagues and co-organizers, Drs. Kyla Story and Ann Caldwell. I'm Kara Snyder, she or they. I'm one of the series organizers, and I'm the newest member of the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies Department. I'm so excited to be here at the University of Louisville. I moved to the city 3 months ago, just as the uprisings against anti-Black racism and state violence swelled. The world was watching Louisville. Recognizing this visibility, together with the folks from WGST, we conceived of an event that is both a celebration and a demand. We celebrate the vision and activism of local leaders, and in particular, the leadership of Black women, and we encourage more members of the UofL community to join in the uprising. We acknowledge the tragedy of Breonna Taylor's murder at the hands of the police and demand all eyes remain on Louisville as the struggle continues. As event organizers, we wanted to do a series because the fight for justice for Breonna Taylor and for the Black, brown, and poor residents of our city is an ongoing struggle with multiple intersections. Over 4 panels in the fall, and hopefully the series will continue into the spring, we've highlighted the labor of activists, like the incredible folks here involved, and we hope that you will join them in demanding racial and economic justice. So we began thinking about the intersections of education and activism. In week 2, we discussed art and activism. Last week, we looked at Latinx solidarity with Black Lives Matter. And in this final week, panelists will weigh in on their approaches to justice. With no further ado, let me introduce tonight's moderator, Sadiqa Reynolds. Former District Judge Sadiqa Reynolds is the first woman to serve as president and CEO of Louisville Urban League. Her work on jobs, justice, education, health, and housing has garnered the attention and coverage of CNN, Fox News, the New York Times, and other national media outlets. Reynolds was the first African-American woman to clerk for the Kentucky Supreme Court and the first African-American to serve Kentucky as Inspector General. She has also run a private practice handling criminal defense matters and representing abused, neglected, and dependent children. In 2017, Reynolds was named Community Leader of the Year by the National Alliance on Mental Illness for her work to reduce the stigma around mental health. She is a proponent for restorative justice and has been a participant in the Face It campaign against child abuse. Reynolds has been recognized as a business-first entrepreneuring woman to watch and women of influence. She has been honored with a Tower Award, a Torch of Wisdom, and named a Daughter of Greatness by the Ali Center. In 2016, she received the Fannie Lou Hamer Award for Justice and was recognized as BizWoman's Business Journal Top 100 Women to Watch nationally. The Mortgage Brokers Association recognized her for housing advocacy, and she was the IABC PRSA Communicator of the Year. Reynolds was Louisville Magazine's 2017 Person of the Year, the 2018 National Urban League Woman of Power, and the Audrey Grievous Community Enrichment Award recipient. The National Bar Association also named her a Gertrude E. Rush Award recipient for her justice and advocacy work. Reynolds is the mother of 2 daughters, Sydney 8th grade and Winter 6th grade, both being educated in the Jefferson County public school system. Thank you so much for being here, Sadiqa.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for reading that bio. I really do appreciate it. I think it's important for Black people, Black women especially, to read it all, because we walk into so many rooms where people don't acknowledge, and sometimes you have to walk in with every degree and every honor just in order to get the respect you deserve. And I know that's not true for this panel, but it matters, and I appreciate you reading it. Thank you. And I'll make 2 little corrections because my kids would kill me. I have a 10th grader and an 8th grader now. If they heard you say 6th and 8th, I would really be in trouble. But thank you. It is an honor to be here with you all. This is a powerhouse panel tonight. I am so excited to be moderating this wonderful group of strong and intelligent Black women. I am so excited to hear from you all. I know that everybody who is out there in cyberspace is excited about hearing from you. So what I'd love for you all to do first, before we get into anything else, is just to tell us a little bit about yourselves. Take 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and tell everybody who you are, what you do, and anything else you want us to know. So I will start with Dr. Dawson because I don't know, I just want to do that. So there you go. Go ahead, sis.
I was just going to think about what I was going to say while other people talk, but hello, good evening. I'm Cherie Dawson Edwards. I am a professor in the Department of Criminal Justice at the University of Louisville. I'm also now serving as the Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Louisville. I also direct our social change program. And so I come to spaces like this from a lens that is different than a lot of criminal justice professors, because I certainly have and always will consider racial justice and social justice and how it intersects with the criminal legal system. And in my teaching and my research, I focus on race and justice, particularly race and juvenile justice, and also things related to race and exclusionary discipline in our school systems, specifically our public school systems. So I'm here today, wearing multiple hats. I am a mom. I have a 5-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son. I am from Louisville. I love Louisville. Louisville doesn't always feel like it loves me, but I love Louisville. And so I show up in these spaces supporting the folks that have been doing this hard work. I will disclose if Keturah doesn't do it. When we're on panels together, we share that we've known each other for a long time. Keturah was one of my students a long time ago. And I'm super proud of the work that she has been doing. And it's always a pleasure to be on a panel or any space with her, given that history. So I will shut up and let you call on the next person to introduce themselves.
Well, why don't we just go right ahead and get to Keturah?
Good evening. My name is Keturah Herron, and I am a policy strategist at the ACLU of Kentucky. And I would describe myself as a Black queer woman who grew up in rural Kentucky, but moved to Louisville when I was 19 and traveled around in my 20s and 30s. And so the lens that I have, the critical consciousness that I have and bring to the work is very broad and very big. I've spent about 16 or 17 years working with youth and families impacted by social services and by the juvenile justice system. And so in the new lane that I'm in now, doing policy and looking at laws, a lot of my personal life and professional life, it allows me and helps me to do the work that I do. I'm also someone directly impacted by the criminal justice system. So that's another layer of who I am. And I'm excited to be here. Definitely a group of powerful women. And it's just an honor to be in this space. And I will say this, I am someone who prefers to be in the background. And for the students who are out there listening, the life that you live, the things that you experience in your life prepares you for the journey. And so I am able to walk in spaces and be in spaces and sit on these panels because of the life and because of those experiences. And that's what makes us qualified. So before we get into, I just encourage you all to be confident in who you are and really do that deep dive searching and realize who you are. And that makes you qualified to be in the spaces and to speak on the things that you will be speaking on. Thank you.
Like that makes you qualified, which you talked about students. So let's just get to the top student, Ashanti. Go ahead, girl.
All right, thank you. My name's Ashanti Scott. I'm a resident of Louisville, graduate of Butler Traditional High School. I'm a second-year student at the University of Louisville, where I study political science and Spanish. I'm also a pharmacy technician at Walgreens, and I'm just honored to be here today. I'm here to share on my experiences in Louisville, in the Breonna Taylor movement, in justice work, and share and learn. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And that leaves us with Lonita Baker, my very good friend. Just girl, go ahead, introduce yourself. Tell us about you and what you've been doing and whatever you want us to know.
My name is Lonita Baker. I am an attorney in Louisville, Kentucky. I currently work with Aguilar Injury Lawyers. I am one of the attorneys who had the honor and privilege to represent the family of Breonna Taylor. And so I look forward to discussing Breonna Taylor here tonight. My primary practice is in personal injury litigation. However, I have an extensive background in criminal law, where I practice as a criminal defense attorney and a prosecutor. So I've worked on both sides of the V. I also worked at the county attorneys. I've represented the city of Louisville and advised Louisville Metro Council in policy making and drafting legislation, ordinances, and making sure that any ordinances that we had within the city were in compliance with state and federal law, as well as advising the city in any lawsuits that were filed against the city for various agencies. I am a vice president for the National Bar Association, past president for the Louisville Black Lawyers Association, and I've sat on the board for the Louisville Bar Association. I also have the great honor of working with Sadiqa Reynolds through the Raleigh Reentry Program, where I do serve as the lead attorney for the expungement project that they do there, where we expunge we do more expungements in one day than the state of Kentucky does in an entire year. So honored to do that work with her. And I look forward to this discussion tonight about how we, hopefully a lot of the discussion is where do we go from here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important. And I thank you so much for that. And you know, something you said, I think that should be part of our discussion is where do we go from here? Because people do need to understand that the conversation and the work will go on and must go on. But Lonita, as you were introducing yourself, I really thought of a question that I wasn't supposed to ask you, but I'm going to ask. Thinking about the work that you have done for the city, because you had a previous life right before the Breonna Taylor case, how do you think it impacted, helped you to move through that case, your previous work with the city? How do you think it really impacted your work in the Breonna Taylor case, if at all?
It definitely had a tremendous impact on my work with the Breonna Taylor case. It gave me the insight into, knowing what about the standard operating procedures, the background that I have in knowing what documents to ask for from Louisville Metro government, because one thing I've learned from being on this side of the civil rights of the V against Louisville Metro government and representing plaintiffs against Louisville Metro government is you definitely have to request the exact document. It's not as easy as to when I was a prosecutor or when I was working for the city to say, hey, I need this information and I got it. There is that gameplay on, yeah, we don't have anything related to that. And so that is, so it definitely helped. Also with the legislative work that I did for Louisville Metro government, that definitely helped in working with Keturah and drafting Breonna's law. I know a lot of people wondered why we went straight to Louisville Metro Council to get the ordinance as opposed to the state. Well, the one thing that I knew is at the time that people began to pay attention to Breonna, which was in May, the Louisville Metro government was still meeting. Louisville Metro Council was still having meetings. I knew the process that it took from getting an ordinance introduced to when it was passed. And so, I knew that was something we could do on a local level right away, whereas the state doesn't meet unless they call a special session. They don't meet until January. Also recognizing the hurdle that it will be getting a no-knock warrant out. And I'm up for the fight, and I want everyone to join into that fight. But the hurdle that there will be in getting the legislation passed on the state level, with the, and not to make it a partisan politic thing, but it is a partisan politics. And right now the Republicans control a supermajority of the state house. And so we really have to get creative in the legislation. So I look forward to working with people like Keturah, the Urban League, and others to come up with those creative solutions.
But what I think is important, though, for people to hear, for the students to hear, I think in the Black community, there has been some criticism of people who have decided to ever in their lives prosecute or to ever go and work for the man. And what I hear you saying is there is some benefit. You learn some things. I mean, you all were able to get the largest settlement this country has ever seen for the life of a Black woman.
And I encourage people, and you know, Sadiqa, you've been a judge, you know the power that prosecutors have in a courtroom. I encourage people who are truly in the believe that the criminal justice system is about rehabilitation, because that's my wholehearted belief that that's what it's supposed to be about, and that's how I prosecute it. So I prosecute it from the lens of what can I do to prevent this person from coming back into my courtroom? So what services can I provide? Not everyone needs to be in jail. And so when you have more prosecutors that think or prosecute from that lens, from that standpoint, then we have a better criminal justice system. So I tell people I'm somewhere in between the camps of, you know, some people say, there's the saying that the criminal justice system isn't broken, it's working exactly how it's supposed to. It does work how it's supposed to. So I don't think that it's the system that's broken. I think that it's the people that we put in to head these systems. So it's the people behind the system. And if you have more prosecutors that truly uphold the justice scenario, truly push for rehabilitation, you have an entirely different criminal justice system. So it's the people, not necessarily the system.
Wow. Okay. Different, very different perspective. I appreciate that answer. So Keturah, I want you to respond to what Lonita just said about the people and the system. Remember that. But I also want you to talk to us and to these students about your interaction with the criminal justice system, or just generally, what influenced you to do what you are doing now? Because I mean, my heart almost bursts open when I see you and I see the work that you're doing. And I mean, since you know that. And so talk to us about your journey. But before you do that, respond to what you just heard Lonita say, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Lonita is right, is that it's important for us to know and learn all sides of the system if you want to really work in the system. And so it goes back to your journey in life. And so if you want to be a defense attorney, if you want to change the system, the best way to do that is to go and prosecute and learn what the good things are and what the bad things are, so you can be very clearly aware of where you want to be and where you stand. And I also think that we have to have people inside the system who know and get what real justice means and what rehabilitation means, and what injustice means, so people can disrupt that. And so that is it's inedible. And so for those folks who say, you know, I want to do social justice, I think it is important that you take a broader look, and figure out what that means and what that looks like, because we have to disrupt the system. And that's the whole piece, is disrupting the system of white supremacy that lies within our criminal legal system. And yes, I've been impacted. I've been directly impacted. I've had a lot of my family members have been directly impacted. And it's crazy how life comes full circle. I was wrongfully arrested for driving while Black here in Louisville, Kentucky. I was pulled over on Bardstown Road and was asked why I was in the neighborhood, and was called a male. So it goes back to that gender piece. And literally was arrested for turning right on red. And I turned right on red after the contact with the police officer. And what's very interesting is that Sadiqa is the person who actually got me out of jail that evening. I don't know, 15, 20, years ago, right? And so for me, it's important, you know, for a while I was ashamed and didn't want to talk about that. But it's those reasons that makes me qualified that all of us at any point in time can be impacted by injustice because of the color of our skin or because of our gender or because of the way we look. And I think that for me, it just came to a point that it's important for me to tell my story. It's not about me, it's about my community. And again, I can walk in these spaces and say, yeah, this is what happened. And with that story, I was actually able to help change legislation in Frankfurt with expungements, right? And so this past session, I worked actually with a Republican, a Representative Bratcher, to expand our expungement laws here in Kentucky. Before, if you had a case that was dismissed or a case where you were acquitted, so where the Commonwealth said that you did something and took you to trial and they found that you were not guilty, that was still on your record. And you as an individual had to take it upon yourself to get that out off of your record. And I testified and was like, no, that's the Commonwealth needs to take that off. And so now here in Kentucky, automatically that comes off. And so again, because of those experiences and the things that I've dealt with in my life, it makes me qualified to stand in these spaces and say, this is what it is. And I'm not saying this because of this ideology. I'm saying it because I've lived it. And that's how I enter.
Wow, that's powerful. That's really powerful. And what Keturah doesn't say is she wanted to sue the police department after that. And it was, you know, Lonita, imagine, right, 20 something years ago, suing the police and trying to prove that they pulled you over wrongfully. I mean, you know, and I was like, Keturah, we got to get these charges dismissed. I just don't want you to go to jail. I got to get this, like, let's stay focused, you know, but it's that lawyering and trying to manage and keep your client out of jail and really secure their future. I mean, there's so many things that a good lawyer is trying to balance. And I can remember that day very well. So I appreciate you saying that, Keturah. And also the way you use your experiences to change other people's lives. I think that is just, you know, that's what separates. That's what separates you. Love that. So before we get into Breonna, well, let me just ask you. So I don't know how to do this. I'm trying to. So okay, no, Dr. Dawson, and I'm gonna call you Dr. Dawson because because you're doctor, and I like that. I just like saying it. I want you to respond to what you've heard. Kind of talk us through what you're feeling. Based on what you've heard from Lonita and Keturah, but then also weave in for me some conversation around restorative justice. And I thought of that when Keturah talked about expungements and whatnot. And then I'll come to you, Ashanti, to really talk about Breonna, okay? All right, go ahead, Dr.
So
Dawson.
yeah, I think what Lonita said about being on both sides of the V and understanding the criminal legal system side, but then also understanding how to fight against injustices, and Keturah added to that. I think as a professor, a criminal justice educator, that's always been my lens, you know, that my students are usually coming into our major wanting to work in the criminal justice system. Now, I think I've changed some minds, and it's not that's my desire to change minds, but I have to show them different sides of things. So yes, you might be a third generation police officer, but like, have you ever thought about what it feels like to be on the other end of that? And so I make sure that that's part of our education. I just took the position as associate dean. Before that, I was the department chair for criminal justice. And so under my leadership was the Southern Police Institute and the certificates that go underneath that. And so I felt it was important as the leader of that department to infuse social justice in our curriculum at all levels. And I'm still working on that, even though I'm not the department chair, because I think we can't just teach people about the system. We have to teach people about society and how the system interfaces with that. And so I think that most students that have had me, I have some former students in present today. I didn't know they were going to be here, but they can attest to that. And that weaves in with the restorative justice, because I created a course in our curriculum 5 years ago called Social and Restorative Justice. It was the first one of our kind. Our department has been historically policing centered. And so it took a lot for me to be able to interject that kind of criminal justice education in a longstanding department like ours. It became an official class, and I'm super excited about that. So our students learn about restorative justice. It is a class that they learn about that concept. And that's difficult for people, because when you think about criminal justice, if you haven't gotten a broader perspective, you tend to think about the more punitive side, of it. And I know we were talking a little bit about rehabilitation, but people don't necessarily think about the harm. We think about people violating the law, or, breaking the social contract, but taking people out of it and talking about harm, and even community harm, just is a different way of thinking, a paradigm shift in thinking about justice. And I believe that I know some people have a problem with the term restorative justice, because it's like restoring people to what? And people often prefer thinking about transformative justice or community accountability. And I think that that's part of the conversations that we're having in Louisville today, is like, what does community accountability look like? What does community safety look like? How do we use restorative and principles that we've borrowed from indigenous folks? How do we use that to address safety and harm in our community? And so I think it's important for people to understand that in restorative justice, we're not even using the same language. We're not talking about criminals and offenders. We're talking about people that harmed other people, the wrongdoer, the person who harmed someone else, and the person that was harmed. And so that just completely takes away that language that we're so used to and accustomed to, and stigmatizing folks, because we all make mistakes. All of us, every single one of us makes a mistake. We've all harmed someone, and harm can be a variety of different things. And I think that's the kind of language we have to start using to transform our society and transform what justice looks like. And I'm just talking about Louisville. I hope it happens everywhere, but in Louisville, we need to think about what justice looks like. And it doesn't always look like public safety and protection. Sometimes it looks like community safety and accountability.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, Ashanti, by my count, unless I'm wrong and somebody on this panel will correct me, you are the only one of us that ended up in jail during the protesting for justice for Breonna. Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So, talk to us about that experience, really. I mean, because the idea of peaceful protesters, of you and your mom and Shamika walking down the street, and just talk to us about that experience. And then what I want you to do is tell me, what, from your perspective, does justice for Breonna Taylor look like?
All right. So I was involved with the Breonna Taylor protest probably like the second day after protest in Louisville started. And me and my mom, who is State Representative Attica Scott for the audience, we just kind of showed up like every day almost at Injustice Square Park to help them hold that space and demand accountability and transparency in that case. So the night of the grand jury decision, my mom had actually just come out of quarantine. She had tested positive for COVID-19, unfortunately. And we went, and there were other elected officials gathered, and we protested. And then we made it to a church, First Unitarian Church, that was giving sanctuary to protesters who wanted to be out there, but was getting close to the curfew that was imposed. I think it was at 9 o'clock. And then we did the same thing on the second night of protest, but we got separated from the march because we were in a vehicle following the marchers, and a LMPD truck had blocked us off in our vehicle. And so we didn't want to be in the vehicle at the time of the curfew, because we were like, we don't know if they can arrest us in our car. So we tried to walk and make it to First Unitarian Church before the curfew was over, because this is all about like 8 to 10 minutes before the curfew. And as we're walking up to the church, there's just police and riot gear surrounding the backside of the church, which is also kind of the backside of the Louisville Free main public library. So we try to go to the front side to avoid the police officers. My mom was live streaming the entire time, and they also are surrounding the church from there. So we kind of made the quick decision. We were like, we're just gonna walk straight up and just enter the church, because at that time, it was before the curfew. We had been protesting, chanting, marching, which we have every right to do. So we were like, we're just gonna go into the church and we're gonna get our sanctuary for the night. And as we walk up, it was probably one of the craziest moments I've ever experienced. It was like a lot of yelling, a lot of commotion, and it was pretty wild because you have all these officers in riot gear pointing. I didn't even know if they were rubber bullets or real guns. I didn't even know. And some of them were yelling at us to turn back, and then some of them were yelling at us to get on the ground. Some people were yelling to surround them. So like you were just getting different orders from different people, and it was just extremely crazy. And I was just like, I don't even know what to do. So I just kind of stood there, and then they got us on the ground, and we were outside for about—
They got you on the ground, y'all? Really?
Yeah, we were on the ground, like on the ground, and we were there for like 30 minutes to an hour, and we were actually arrested with Miss Rhonda Mathis, who she's always been showing up for justice for a long time. And she's older. She's an older woman. And we asked, could she stand up? And they were like, no, they wouldn't let her stand off the curb. It was crazy. So yeah, so we were out there. Then they put us in the paddy wagon. And we get to the jail, and they take our pictures and they book us. And so then they separated my mom from the rest of the group. And I had thought it was because she had tested positive for COVID, which surprised me because they weren't being like COVID safe. Like they were touching our mask, pulling our mask down, and then they wouldn't pull them up. Like they put the mask down to take pictures, and then they wouldn't put them back up. And like obviously we were cuffed, so I couldn't pull my mask up. So like I didn't have a mask on until I asked one of the guys, and he pulled my mask up for me. And so yeah, so they had kept her separate. And we found out later it was because of her status as a state representative. And they moved us. We were all in a room together. And I know I met another UofL student who was arrested for a curfew violation at a different location. And then we had another girl who was arrested for a curfew violation, and she missed work the next morning because they had kept them in for longer. And I didn't know the charges. I thought we were in there for a curfew violation, and because they never told us our charges. So it was my surprise when I came out and it was felony rioting. I was like, there's no way, they're not serious. And felony rioting for damaging a public library that as a child I had volunteered at and had went to Cafe Louis at. It was just completely crazy. And so thankfully we got out about 12 hours later. We were in their custody for a total
12 hours in jail for a curfew violation after laying on the ground for 30 minutes to an hour and not being protected in a pandemic. I mean, okay. I mean, those are the kinds of things that we have got to talk about, the dehumanization, the process of it all, the things that, and this is what happens to regular people. This is what happens all the time.
Yeah. And I mean, we were released the next morning, but another individual who was arrested alongside us, he had another charge, I think from the protest earlier. So he actually didn't get out until about a week later. And he was back at the park, Dominique. But yeah, so then we had our court date for our felonies, and the county attorney dropped the felonies for us. And then we actually just had our court date a couple of days ago on the 16th for the misdemeanor charges. And because of the work of the community, the phone calls they made to County Attorney Mike O'Connell's office and the emails, he also dropped the misdemeanor charges against all 18 of us from that night.
That's excellent. And I think, you know, I think Mike O'Connell is influenced by his time with Miss Baker on his staff and their relationship. And I think that we should never take things like that for granted. I think that's really important. But tell us, Ashanti, what does Justice for Breonna, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, I think that one big thing that we're pushing for is Breonna's law at the state level, and even on the national level. I'm so grateful for the work and the partnerships that have happened to draft Breonna's law for Kentucky. And it's going to be a tough fight because there are only now 25 Democratic legislators. And so it's going to be hard. But we're ready and we're in it for the long haul. I think another aspect of Justice for Breonna Taylor looks like a Metro Council that is a bit more transparent and that is being held more accountable. I know a lot of the young people that have been occupying in Justice Square Park and the young people that go to UofL, that go to high school, college in Louisville, they really want to see their elected officials voting no for the FOP contract. They don't want to see police officers getting raises. They want to see the Louisville Metro Police Department being defunded and that money being reallocated to our communities to help with food justice, to help with alleviating those from poverty, to help with some of the abandoned and vacant properties we see, especially in West Louisville. So I think that that's holistically what Justice for Breonna Taylor looks like.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you so much. So everybody unmute for me, please, on this panel, and let's just talk. Let's talk, just jump in. What does Justice for Breonna look like to each of you, to this community, for all of us? What does it look like?
So for me, Justice for Breonna is still for the officers to be held accountable. I think it's important for people to understand that jeopardy has not attached to the decision. So I've seen people say, you know, the verdict, what Daniel Cameron did was not a verdict. And so jeopardy does not attach. You know, and one of the things that was the most frustrating for me was at times I would see, you know, different news stations to stay abreast of Breonna or try to stay relevant in the conversation. They would reach out to other attorneys to get their input on whether or not the officer should be charged. And so you had attorneys giving a lot of opinions that the officer should not be charged because Kenny fired a shot, they were responding in self-defense. But I've seen a number of those attorneys backtrack on that once they saw all of the evidence that we had access to. Mm-hmm. So I think it was important for people to understand that when the legal team, me, Sam, and Ben were calling for charges for these officers, and we were talking to people like you, Sadiqa, who was asking, what are the facts? Where they're going? You weren't just asking that of us, you were also going to other sources that you have to get information. So you weren't just taking the attorney's word for it, but so people were not coming to us to ask us, hey, what all is going on? Why do you feel that they should be charged? To get the information so that I could outline exactly why those officers, all of them, should have been charged with wanton murder of Breonna Taylor. And so now you have a lot of the officers who are having, or a lot of the attorneys who have spoken up, having to backtrack on that because now all of the evidence is out there, and it's like, oh shoot, maybe we put our foot in our mouths. And so I think that sometimes when we do things like that, and as attorneys, I talk to the legal community, we need to be more cognizant of when we're speaking and not just wanting to speak, but make sure we have enough evidence to really give a true legal opinion on whether or not they should have been charged. Because I think Daniel Cameron kind of hung his hat on, oh, well, we have some people, some defense attorneys who say they shouldn't be charged.
I think that there are people in the Black community that gave him permission to do what he did, which was not his job.
Exactly.
He did everything but his job. Don't get me started because I'm not on this panel. Go ahead.
And so that was one of the frustrating, and I know I talked to you about that, so you know how frustrating that was for me. But what I want people to understand is jeopardy is not attached. And I'm going to fight for justice for Breonna, for these officers to be held accountable until a jury comes back and says they are not guilty or guilty, because only then does jeopardy attach. So it could, I don't care if December 4th, the prosecutors at Badger Council is going to determine if they appoint a special prosecutor aside from Daniel Cameron, whether they will give us a different prosecutor who will do what's right. But guess what? If they don't, when we elect a new Commonwealth attorney in Louisville, Kentucky in 2024, is that the right year?
Don't tell all your strategy. Don't tell all your strategy.
Well, I'm just saying, if we don't have an indictment by then, I'm gonna be, whoever's running for Commonwealth attorney at that time, I'm like, look, what's your position on this? Like, give it to a grand jury, let it, like, and we talk about that a lot. Had charges on behalf of Breonna been presented to a grand jury and the grand jury did in fact not indict, I'd be upset, but I wouldn't be as angry about the way that it all played out.
Right.
So justice for me is that these officers to be held accountable, that we get laws changed, that our community continues to call on accountability for the officers, for all officers. I'll turn it over, but you get what I'm saying.
We absolutely get what you're saying, and I want to say that if Daniel Cameron had done his job and been honest with us when he stood up at that press conference, we could have lived with whatever decision. But what we cannot live with is the dishonesty and what appears to be incompetence. Keturah, Dr. Dawson, what y'all want to add?
Yeah, I'll hop in. I want to comment on something that Ashanti said earlier that made me think about something, is that those very same women and people who was arrested with Ashanti and Representative Scott and Shamika, those are the people who kept the city from burning down. And I think that people have to be very, very clear and understand that there was a group of individuals who literally kept Louisville from being a Ferguson, from being another place where you actually saw places burning down to the ground. And so I like to say that and let people know that, because that is the depth and the heart and how much this means to us, this fight. It's not just about us and it is about justice, but we're also protecting this whole ass city. And so I wanted to put that out there. And then this is the second time that I've been asked this question publicly about what does justice for Breonna mean. And I don't know what that is, to be honest. It's hard for me to wrap my head around it. I believe that in the no-knock warrants, that's a low-hanging fruit. I think that is not, in my personal opinion, I just think that that's something that is a must. When you heard, when we passed it here locally, Ms. Tamika said that passing Breonna's law locally allows Breonna to do what she wanted to do, and that was saving human life. So this bill is about the preservation of human life. And so this is like a must. But I don't think that for me personally, as far as justice for her, it's more than that, and I think that it's about that accountability piece. How do we hold police accountable? How do we make sure that the officers who were even engaged in that that night, who should have been gone from our police department long before, were held accountable and gone? And so it's very hard for me personally to wrap my mind around, like, what really does justice for Breonna Taylor mean? Because for me, like, I would have wanted her to be here. But, her mother, Ms. Tamika said it, this passing of this law is her doing what she wanted to do. So to me, passing Breonna's law and taking it nationwide, that's honoring Breonna Taylor, but that's not really necessarily getting justice. The justice part is tearing down the systematic racism and white supremacy within policing, and how our communities, how Black communities and brown communities and poor white communities have for decades and for centuries been terrorized by this system of policing. And so it's a lot. And I hopefully one day will be able to articulate really what that means for me personally, but I haven't really been able to do that.
I just want to say I completely agree because and thank you for saying it. You probably said it better than I'm going to say it, Keturah. But to me, justice for Breonna is about rethinking justice, period. It's stopping what we know as justice right now. And I'm going to wear the hat as Cherie, whatever. And I'm not representing criminal justice or anything. You know, I've been asked a lot of times to talk about what is defund the police. You know, Keturah and I had a wonderful experience in Frankfurt a couple of weeks ago. Wonderful, I'm using that very sarcastically, about defund the police. And, you know, I talked to that committee, I don't remember the name of it, Keturah, Veterans and Public Protection, Veterans, Military, Public Protection. I talked to them about concepts, and even in a conversation that was literally about defining concepts, like I was totally attacked. You know, I got an apology, but I was attacked. What I find interesting is that the person who attacked me, I don't proudly say this, but I used to serve on Kentucky State Police Promotion Board panels for years, like 15 years ago. And that person was on those panels with me. And I don't know if Keturah remembers, but I was like, who is that? Like, he looks so familiar. So I wrote him a letter afterwards reminding him and sent him a picture that I really don't appreciate being disrespected, given my service to the Kentucky State Police. And so just being Cherie, we've got to change our justice system. And I respect, you know, Lonita's perspective about like, it's working, we have to get the people right. But sometimes it's not just the people. Sometimes it's the way, the entrenched culture that's longstanding and rooted in white supremacy that cannot be changed unless we think of another way of doing it. And so when we think about alternatives to our current system, then we need to think about what could that look like? And part of the problem with this whole like abolition or whatever is because people don't, what could it look like? We only know what we have in front of us. And that's the same argument people have about restorative justice. Well, what is that going to look like? Well, we have to try, you know, and we have to elevate and amplify those alternatives that are existing. We have to build. I mean, that's what folks are arguing for in Minneapolis. They didn't say, oh, we're going to abolish the police without working on building alternatives. And so it's not going to happen overnight. But to me, justice for Breonna in this city in particular is that we need to build and we need to support and elevate and amplify alternatives to safety that don't necessarily look like our traditional models. And that's going to take a lot of the community to come together and say, this is what we want to do. But we also have to figure out what that looks like. And that takes information gathering from community members as to what does community safety look like? Does it look like the traditional model of public safety? I've heard a lot of people say no, but how do we build this new model? And I think we're positioned in Louisville right now to work on that and work towards that. And I also think it's incumbent upon community members to continue to push for transparency in public safety, and therefore using the information we're getting to hold them accountable. I feel like I was talking to a reporter today, and I was like, I feel like there's more public education about some of these things that we may teach about or research about than ever. Like I'm seeing Facebook posts, you know, people giving people language. This is what you say to your council person about the FOP contract. Like regular people have language now, you know, to argue for what they want. And I think that makes me very hopeful about where we can go and how we can continue to seek justice for Breonna in this community.
Anybody? Ashanti, you want to add anything? I think I asked you that. I started with you, didn't I? Okay, so you brought up defunding police. Talk to me about what that means. I want to talk about what does defunding police mean to us? And well, let's just start there. Just anybody, everybody, simultaneously. Come on, keep it moving.
I mean, I'll start. So defunding the police could mean a couple of things. It could mean take away money from the police. And, you know, it could mean take that money and invest in communities. It could mean take the money from the police and give it to other governmental structures, which people would argue don't do that, you know. So there's the idea that you think about what so I usually show, I don't have a PowerPoint, but I usually show this cartoon, and it's like this police officer who has all these boulders on his back. And those boulders are like mental health, domestic violence, all these things that maybe the police shouldn't be responding to initially anyway. And then the next iteration of the cartoon is showing the boulders rolled to the appropriate places. And then the police only has their one thing. And so if the police only has their one thing and it's not addressing mental health crises or domestic violence or other, type of, more social service oriented, then why do they need the big budget? They don't have as much to do, because so we can take the money that we don't need for big police budgets and large police forces and put them in alternatives. And that's when I talk about community safety alternatives, I'm not necessarily saying, oh, let's give it to social workers, because I fear that if we take money from one governmental entity and put it into another one, how do we prevent that entity from becoming more criminalized or, punitive oriented? And that's not what social workers are supposed to be about. But how do we ensure that that doesn't happen? I'm much more interested in reallocating that money to the community in more grassroots-based, community-based safety models, or community accountability models, whether it's restorative justice, whether it's folks that, build off of the transformative justice impact or thinking. But it's essentially taking money from the police, but determining where you put it is how you, define defunding the police in my perspective. I also want to remind people that defunding the police can be a strategy, an abolitionist strategy, for the future. But everybody that believes that concept does not necessarily believe in police abolition.
Mm-hmm. Keturah, were you?
Yeah, I was gonna jump in, and I think that Dr. Dawson Edwards, she hit it, on the head. For me, defunding the police means making sure that communities have what they need so they don't need police. And so when you look at the community of Louisville and you look at the West End, and that it's in a food apartheid, and you have all of these, I think, 5,000 abandoned buildings and homes and properties. If our city invested in the people, then we wouldn't need police. I mean, you can take the Beecher Terrace infrastructure. At one point in time, 1 in 3 persons who lived in Beecher Terrace have been impacted by the criminal legal system, and they invested in the property of that place, but they displaced the people. And so our city and our nation goes back to white supremacy. White supremacy is more concerned about the property than what the people is. And so I think that we just have to think about things in a different way. And how are we investing in people? How are we making sure that people have their basic needs met? Think about when you as an individual are hungry and you are running errands and you're doing this and doing that, and your child calls you or your partner calls you, how you're easy to snap. Like, you are not thinking correctly because you are literally hungry and without. And so when you look at the population of people here in Louisville who have been impacted by the criminal legal system, most of those folks are literally starving. And so we have to literally think about things differently as far as making sure that people have their basic needs met, and then also making sure that we aren't fighting against each other for the little resources that they do provide. And so it does take a lot, and it is going to take a lot for us to really switch our mindset as far as what does it mean to live? What does society mean? Or what does it look like? And how do we reimagine living in general? And that's the transformational work. But I have to check myself on a daily basis. Like, what am I doing? Am I doing things correctly? And I've got people that I call and say, I need you to hold me accountable. If I'm not doing these things correctly, please call me. Don't call me. You ain't got to call me out on social media. You got my number. Call me and let me know, because we're all learning. You know, this is a new way of living that we've never been able to see. And it is going to take a long time. And sometimes I question and wonder if we will actually see the change, the real change in community that we want to see, right? But I think it's up to us to lay that foundation and actually start practicing those things. to help show people what that means and what that looks like.
Excellent. Ashanti, defund the police. What's that mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's definitely what you all said. I really don't have that much to add. It's just reallocating funds that we give to the police department and giving those funds back into the community. I also think that it requires the community's input. When we talk about defunding the police, we have to have individuals in the community, kind of like that grassroots level, saying where they want those funds to go, what they want to see those funds do. Because if you don't have the community's input and it's just like a bunch of big figures or leaders making the decisions for everyone, it's going to be a failed and flawed system. So I think that defunding the police is definitely important, that we get the community's input as we do that.
You know, what I want to say about that, I think this is important. The reason that the Louisville Urban League focuses on jobs, justice, education, health, and housing is because I really believe it to be a holistic approach to how we heal what policies have broken in our communities. You cannot ask someone to learn and they are homeless. We have 6,000 homeless children in our public school system. You cannot, in a community, in a city where the government has recognized redlining and acknowledged it, but failed to give any sort of financial response to our inability to acquire, hold down, die, pass down wealth. You have to have a response to that. What I say, and I think this is important for us to begin to talk about, when soldiers go to war and come home, if they need help, and some of them have been traumatized by what they see in the war zone, if they need help and they don't get it, they are undiagnosed, untreated, they could wreak havoc in their families, on their communities. We have entire communities of Black people who are living in war zones, over-policed, underhoused, underfunded, in every way, job openings, but not for you. In every way, there is no other person in this country brought here or kept here in the condition that Black Americans have been in. That's the bottom line. And so, but we have not had any intentional response to that. And so when you don't, what happens is your trauma, undiagnosed, untreated. And so then they say, well, but it's violent. Well, because that's what happens. Because like the soldier, havoc can be wreaked in a community with people who are untreated, undiagnosed. And that's what we have to begin talking about. We've got to talk about investment in housing. You want to reduce the number of police officers? Give people affordable housing. Give people opportunities for real work. You know, those are the kinds of things that I think we have to really talk about. Investing in small business, those kinds of things. I don't think when we are asked, what does it mean? What would you do when you defund the police? I would fund taking care of our community, all the shit y'all haven't done for 400 and some odd years. That's what we need to be clear about. What it means to use that money for root cause change, not for more Band-Aids. Because that's what we keep getting. And that's what we need to push back on. Everybody can create good programs. All of us have good programs, but root cause change. So I think that is really, I think it's important. Anyway, I love this, and I want y'all to really let's get to the real of our issues and our problems and how we fix it. I do not think it is enough for us to identify the problems. We are powerful. We are intelligent. We have got to be prepared to tell people how to fix it. We have been studied to death. I don't want to participate in another survey about Black people. I have dinner with Black people. I sleep with Black people. I got damn I didn't mean, that was 2 words, y'all. I've got, and then I said, damn family that is Black, that we got the holidays together. I don't have to ask people what is their experience. We are living this. So we have to have solutions. So if you had, like the magic wand, what is the transformative justice? What does transformative justice look like? Cherie, what does it look like to create a different system? What do you dream about? This is your life work. What's your dream?
That's That's a big, Keturah and I have had conversations. I'm like, I can't even think that big. It's been such a small box for so long. But I will say this, that my dream is that we get back to community, and community holding ourselves accountable for whatever. So what does that look like? I think about the stuff that I read about transformative justice, and it can start on neighborhood blocks, in parts of the city where we say, like, if this happens, this is what we're going to do as a neighborhood. Now, the biggest criticism is going to be like, well, what about murder? You know what? Everything's not about the extremes. Sometimes it's about just, disorganization in the community, not about the extreme. So how can we hold each other accountable, even if it's neighborhood blocks or whatever, where we create systems of, community and cohesiveness? And there may be those already, but how do we elevate and amplify that kind of thing throughout our city? When you talked about, what the Louisville Urban League, your cornerstones or whatnot, it makes me think about a podcast I listened to, and people have said this since then, but I listened to this podcast in May, when I really started having conversations with people about what does defund the police look like. And, someone said, well, what does it look like, in neighborhoods would have a lot of violence or whatnot? And the person said, well, it looks like suburbia. People have everything that they need, so they don't need to be over policed. So why can't everywhere look like that? That's right. And so that's my dream. My dream is that, I am privileged and advantaged. I live in suburbia, and I don't get over police. Even as a Black woman, I don't get over police in my zip code. Mm-hmm. But why? It's because everybody out there has everything that they need. Not everything, but they have the resources. How do we give those resources to everybody in our community? We won't even need policing as we know it if we can recreate that model in all parts of our city. And so that's what I believe is my dream, is getting everyone resourced enough where the structure won't cause this problem. I'm not talking about causing crime, but also just causing why people look at certain areas in our community in a different way. I want everybody to look at West Louisville and everywhere the same way they may look at 40241, where I live. That's my dream. And I think that's a dream that you all have at the Louisville Urban League, which is why you do the work that you all do.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Anybody else want to add anything? I want to get to some questions too, but anybody, go ahead and jump in if you want to. Oh my goodness, such a respectable panel. Respectful.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that again, it's like, I think that Dr. Dawson Edwards talked about it, is we are learning. This is one thing, is that we as a society it has been saying this is what it is and this is the only way it is. And so for us to even really start to deeply reimagine like what it's supposed to be, mm-hmm. like we have a hard time doing it. Like we know like what we don't want, but when you ask somebody what they want, it's like, I don't know, but I don't want this. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we're like in that area of like figuring out like what does that look like, and what that means. And I think that, at the basis of it is that all people have their basic needs met. When we don't have our basic needs met, that's when we like, hold on now, I don't have this. So it's going to make me react to different things, like to the smallest things, to somebody bumping into me, to somebody cutting me off in traffic, or somebody stepping on my shoes, or whatever it is. When we don't have the very, very basic needs met, it just causes us to react in a different type of way. And I'll use this as an example. Last week, I took some time and I went to a cabin for a week. In LaGrange, so like right outside of Louisville, but it was weird being out there, but it was peaceful, like in my space. And so I currently live in Old Louisville and I'm ready to move. It's time, I've grown out of my apartment, but I haven't found the perfect space for me to live in. And so these 10 days that I was out, like I woke up and I felt good and I felt refreshed, and like my spirit was just different. I came back on Sunday, I woke up Monday, I woke up Tuesday, I woke up yesterday and today, and like my spirit was off. And it's because my environment, like this environment that I'm living in is no longer fit for me, right? And so it really made me think about people who are living in environments where it's filled with crime, where someone was killed on the block and then 2 weeks later somebody else is killed on the block, or you see the heavy police presence, the environment that we live in. And until we can change the environment, like Dr. Edwards said, until we make sure that it's funny, I guess that must be the thing for me, because I actually went to Books a Million and was out on Westport Road. And I was like, hold on, what is going on out here? I'd never been in there, but it was a completely different world and environment and community. And I was like, wow, just think if everybody had all of these things that they needed in the space. And so I think that the thing is that we have to make sure that all folks have it. Black folks have it. That's all we want. We're not asking for revenge. We're just asking for what we need to make sure that we can live. And I'll be quiet.
And I'll add in, Sadiqa, because I've been quiet for a minute. And I agree with everyone on, we definitely have to invest in our communities. We have to invest in 40211, 40210. We have to, you know, the justice, jobs, education, you know, I'm right there with you, Sadiqa. I haven't quite gotten on the abolition train, and I say that, and I think it's important that people know, you know, a little bit more about my background. My father was killed when I was 10. You know, when I was 18, I had a cousin that was killed, and when I was 5, I had an aunt that was killed by a next door neighbor. So when you take that frame of mind of me and my family being impacted, and I know, you know, Dr. Edwards said, don't focus on the extremes, but to me, that's not an extreme because it hit close to home. I was a daddy's girl. So like, I don't know that I don't know that because of my frame of mind in that I ever be on the abolition, but I am about divesting and putting money into our communities, removing less. I think in an ideal world for me is we are much more strategic as an entire community. We work, especially in Louisville, we work too much in silos of pushing individual agendas as opposed to coming together for a collective agenda. And I think the moment that we can really come together and get a collective agenda together and push it towards our elected leaders, our Metro Council, our city government, our state government, that we work, we're going to get much more done. But I think when, you know, like take the police union contract. I know, you know, we talked today about paying officers more money. I personally, I'm not opposed to paying the officers who deserve more money. I'm a firm believer of you get what you pay for. Do I think that we need, like, was I fazed by the article in the Courier Journal today saying that we've lost so many officers? No, because I do agree that we don't need to be over police. We can reduce the number of police officers that we have, but let's get qualified people in here. Let's get good officers, because there are good officers out there. Let's get rid of them. You know, let's get root cause. It definitely is a culture that has to be, and the only way you change the culture is to pull out the people that are in there. Move that. So I'm unfazed by officers leaving in large numbers. By all means, go LMPD. There is a problem there. It is a cancer. But if we can recruit better officers to our department, as opposed to them going to departments where they are paying more money, by all means pay. So I wasn't fazed by that. But what we did, and what we kind of let slide by and let our legislators get off the hook with is the FOP contract that was approved has less accountability for officers. In our reform package, in our police settlement, we were pushing for more accountability. And I know they kept saying, you know, well, we got to implement things from Breonna Taylor's settlement. The only thing that was implemented from Breonna Taylor's settlement was the housing credits idea. But we wanted more accountability. That contract did not have more accountability. In fact, it had less. So why were we focusing so much on bumping up the starting salary of officers as opposed to the issue at LMPD is accountability? So I think we just have to be more strategic, work together, get more people at the table. And I think Ashanti talked about that, is we can't always go to the same people. Like, we got to bring more people in on the discussion, and it's just got to be a collective. It's got to be a collective agenda. So in my ideal world, we have a collective agenda that we're all pushing forth, that we can all, it's diplomatic process. We all could, like, again, if we're in a room and if all of us, if it's how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 of us, if 4 of y'all vote that we pushing for towards abolition, and I'm saying I'm the one not, then guess what? I got to roll with y'all because I got outvoted, right? So that's my ideal world.
Can I chime in really quickly? So thank you for sharing that. And I just want to clarify, not to you, but to other people, that when I say don't always focus on the extreme, that doesn't mean that there isn't an extreme. And so when I think about reimagining public safety, it doesn't mean that I don't think that there will be some role for some type of policing entity. I don't believe that the current model is working for us. And that doesn't mean that we can't build these community safety alternatives, but for serious offenses or danger or violence, that's very narrow in those extremes, that there's not some type of law enforcement. I just don't currently trust that we can reform our version of law enforcement right now. So I just want to make sure that you know that for people who are victims or survivors of severe violence, that is not your extreme. But when people are making policy decisions and making suggestions, they deviate to just that, as opposed to all the other social ills and problems that could be corrected in another model. So I appreciate you telling us that story, but I just want you to know that I don't believe that it is an extreme. I believe that people go there when they're thinking about what public safety is. It's only about murder and violence. And that's just not what our justice system entails.
That's not the majority of the charges that are in the justice system. So I definitely agree with you on that. And I definitely agree with you on we got to reimagine. And I guess that's where my point is that's got to be a collective. When we're talking about reimagining, it's got to be a collective agenda that all of us can come to, something that we're all going to get behind and we're all going to push forward. Similar to how you did with the path forward, Sadiqa. Like, it's not Urban League. 50 organizations signed on to that. The more people that we can get behind that, or just work towards it, and even if it's, let's come back to, okay, you wasn't at the table, let's come back, let's bring some more people to the table. We went from 50, let's go to 100 and see where we come. It's just, we got to work more collectively.
We do. Ashanti, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add, like, my ideal, and probably because I am so young, it's just uplifting our youth. I definitely think that the youth that have been involved in the Breonna Taylor movement are giving literally their all. They're facing felony charges, they're facing misdemeanor charges that threaten their work, that have impacted their mental health, that have impacted their grades. I lived in West Louisville, and seeing over policing and how that affected friends who are now in the criminal justice system for drug-related offenses, like that, I mean, it really hits home when it's juvenile detention. And I definitely think that the way that we just ensure like generational prosperity is through the youth. So I think that it's important that we invest in education, that we make sure that there's no such thing as school lunch debt, that we ensure that there are fully funded public school teachers. And that's really what my ideal world definitely looks like.
Fully funded, culturally competent public school teachers. Could not agree more. Excellent. Let me go to some of these questions now, but you guys, I could just sit and listen to you all night. There seems to have been a lull in protest activity in Louisville after the verdict came out. What can we in the community do to re-energize activist efforts? And do we need to? I added the last, and do we need to? Ashanti, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that especially with the cold weather and also with the fact that we're in a red zone, I think that's definitely affected protest turnout physically in person, and also because the continued violence that police officers meet protesters with, they've had over 500 arrests. And the reality of the situation is when you're facing charges, you can't really go out there and risk arrest again. On top of that, white supremacists have, they've actually shot at the park when I've been there before. So it is definitely a dangerous situation sometimes. So I think that's definitely made people a little more afraid to show up physically. So I think that definitely the way we revive the movement, I don't want to say revive, because I don't think it's not dead. I want to say the way we just keep the momentum going.
Redirect.
Yeah, redirect. That's a good one. Is, pay attention to the virtual panels, pay attention to what these organizations are doing, because excuse me, there's a lot of work being done, and do what you can. There's a lot of things coming up, like coat drives that are important for community success. It's getting to winter. There's food drives. There's things like that are a part of the larger goals of these protests. So I think that that's definitely a way to keep it going.
Mm-hmm. Keturah, and anybody after Keturah, just jump in, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the main thing, is like we have to take a lot of what the momentum that we had and start educating people. I think that's the biggest point. A lot of folks is the first time that them really being involved in the process, the process of what this means and who are we supposed to be holding accountable. And so I think that we have to take that energy that was in the street and educate each other as far as who are your representatives, who are your elected officials, what that means, how do you engage with them, and what does organizing mean, and really getting people engaged in their issue area. There's a lot of issues that are plaguing our city, and it's not just policing issues. Ashanti just talked about our educational system and our teachers and school lunch or school, and so I think that we have to just get folks educated and get them plugged in as far as what is your interest area and how can you plug in, because we need everybody engaged right now, and we need people, it's almost like we need subcommittees of different people doing different type of work, and so I think that that's the next piece, is just that educating piece of everyone being educated so they can know and understand, and then really looking at the political power that we have. We have a lot of political power right now, and once we get really organized, I think that we'll be a force not only locally in Louisville, but across the state.
And what I want to make sure the protesters is protest the policy, protest the power. I've been using that phrase, since we've been out there. Ashanti talked about it earlier. Out of 100 legislators, only 25 are Democrats. Well, I really don't care what political party they are. We need to stay in their face. You need to be calling your legislators, let them know how, what you think about Breonna's law, what you think about police reform, some of the 67C, which is specifically tailored to Louisville Metro, the police protections in there, the police officer Bill of Rights. So call your legislators and let them know how they feel, regardless of their party, because guess what? Some of the Republicans that are there, they didn't win by that much of a margin. And at the end of the day, that's what politicians are looking at, votes, counting votes. So, if I had it, my advice would be to turn that protest into, okay, let's strategize, let's get this strategy out, get in front of these legislators, call them, let them know, and it's your legislators where you live at, who is your house of your state senator, who's your state representative, and calling them and saying, this is what I feel, because they think that it's just Black people that feel this way, and it's not just us. And so if you consider yourself an ally, like truly be an ally, and call your legislator and let them know what you think. I know I live in that 40291. Dr. Edwards says she's 40241. So we got some work to do with our legislators, right? So that's what I want us to do, because those margins of victories are slim. And if they start getting the calls and we put the pressure on them, we saw what happened with Breonna's law. It started out, when we wanted when Keturah was like, I think we got enough. I think we can push for it to be a complete ban, because she'll tell you, or she may not want to tell people she is being nice towards me. But I was like, we don't need a full, like, we can leave an exception for these offenses, and then I was like, I wanted to make sure that it passed, just being, coming from that political background and thinking who may not. And when Keturah really, she's like, I think we can. I think, we got this number right now that would be in favor of a complete ban. We just got to get to here. And by the time it came down to it, the ACLU, Keturah and them put together a image to go around on Facebook and say these Metro Council members support a complete ban on no-knock warrants. Is your Metro Council person on here? And as soon as that started going around, people were like, well, hold on, I need my picture on there. Once it started going viral on social media, like every Metro Council person wanted to be on there, until it became unanimous that it was a complete ban, right? And so that's the type of pressure we have to continue to put on our legislators, like not just Metro Council, but all of our legislators. And if you really look at those margins, they're small. They, we can, I keep saying the hashtag take the seat. We can really take the seat if they don't do what we need them to do.
And they're already not doing what we need them to do. So we do need to be focused on taking a seat. And I think you raise another really, really good point, which is this idea that we are not a monolithic community. Nobody speaks for all of us. And it took you and Keturah working together, right? And with different perspectives. And I think one thing our community has to do, if you ask me about what comes after the protest, when I protested, and it was pretty regularly, I was not out there every day, but it was a lot, even injured. And you have to know you're standing beside somebody who may believe some things different than you, who may want something that you don't want, or I might want something they don't want. But at the end of the day, we have this endpoint in mind. And I think our community cannot afford to lose sight of that. We cannot lose soldiers. We can't afford to throw people away. And I think we get really siloed sometimes in doing that. And I think we have to do a better job there. And something else I want to say, though, about strategy and all of us, I think it's important. The reason we put together the path forward that you talked about, Lonita, is, again, because we wanted to be able to give people answers. So our thing is focus on the affordable housing and the need for it. Focus on the small business investment, small Black business investment, because we're not getting bank loans at the same rate. We've got to talk about that. Focus on education and closing the achievement gap. We wanted to give people who said, I want to help, but I can't protest, help me understand. And so what we've seen banks create Black business funds. We're going to see more and more Black businesses be funded. We're going to see more and more investment in the West End with a pathway to Black ownership. Those are the things that we have to be pushing for, again, to focus in on that root cause work. I think that is going to be tremendously important for us. Something else I think our community needs to focus on is that student assignment plan. Listen, education matters. We have got to be paying attention to the student assignment plan, all of us, whether we have children or not, because if we're really invested in making our community what it could be, education has to matter to all of us. And I think, as Dr. Polio, I like Dr. Polio a lot. I don't trust anybody completely. You can't do these things in a vacuum. To Ashanti's point, he is going to need to hear our voices. We're going to have to be clear about what our expectations are for that student assignment plan. I have a question directed at Dr. Dawson Edwards. How would you advise the university leadership to respond to the Breonna Taylor outcome and to be more active in Louisville around issues of social justice?
That's an easy question to answer, because I think our university, and this is not a secret, has a lot of work to do to support faculty, staff, and students who want to do that kind of work. We certainly can support students better. I mean, I think about, in my little world, what I can do. I have in the social change program, my students have to do an internship. And it dawned on me that, like, in criminal justice, we give police officers academic credit for like everything, you know? And I was like, well, why can't we give students doing community organizing and social change, like activism credit? And so I have a student who has been actively involved in the process who's going to do his internship credit, his 3 credit hours. I'm giving him 3 credit hours for the work that he's been doing in the community. And so it's just, you know, everything's about reimagining what everything always has been, you know, and if you can do this, then you can make it happen for this. And I think that we need to have more faculty and leaders think about like, what can we do to support this work? The other piece of it is like, even faculty, I'm going to use faculty as an example, that are community engaged scholars is what we call them, or scholar activists, depending on where you are on the spectrum. We don't get credit for the work that we do that builds relationships with the community, but the university wants to document it. But when it comes to our tenure and promotion and merit evaluations, it's really not supported. And so if the university wants to be more of the community, then it needs to support those of us that do that work in better ways. When we show up, whether it's students, whether it's faculty, whether it's staff, they need to support our work. And that's the low hanging fruit. It doesn't take a whole lot to say, oh, in your evaluation, we're going to add a space for this, and that like elevates what you do, because you're making a difference in the community. And not only are you making a difference in the community, the university's name is always attached wherever I go. Even if I say, oh, I'm Cherie today, you know, or even if I'm showing up, I'm on the board of the ACLU. If I show up for the ACLU, I'm still a professor at the University of Louisville. So no matter what I do, the university gets some credit for that, and I don't get credit from them for that. And so we need to figure out strategies for supporting student activism, faculty and staff activism, as well as, and I know we talked about people are tired of being researched or studied, but there is room for that type of research, and community-based or community-engaged research requires folks to be in the community, develop buy-in and trust and legitimacy, and don't go in, do some research and leave. Those of us who do it and do it well, people in the community know us, and they know that we're coming back, and they know that, you know, if they need us for something else, that's what we're there for. And so we just need to do a better job of supporting the faculty, staff, and students that are doing that, and encouraging those who would do it but are on tenure track and don't have, you know, that they can be ensured that they're protected and valued by the university. So that's what I'm pushing for in my unit. So I can make it happen in the College of Arts and Sciences, but I'm not in control of the whole university.
Understood. And so we have reached 8:30, and we promised everybody that we would be done by then. But I would like to end with each of you giving us just, you know, what is a last word? What is a word, a quote, anything? How would you like to end? What do you want to leave people with? You have 30 seconds, and I will start with Lonita Baker.
Yes, as a lawyer, I'm gonna quote Charles Hamilton Houston and I know not everyone here are lawyers, but it's a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. As we're doing this work, you have to get lawyers involved, more lawyers involved. And that's the one that when I say we have to be collective, that's one thing that I do think as we move forward, it's missing in legislation and everything. So
all right,
get the lawyers involved.
Keturah?
Yeah, I would like to say when we talk about social injustice, there's a wide variety of things that come up, and I just encourage people to find and understand what their talents are, what their interests are, and get in that lane and really get to work, because we need everybody in all areas.
Dr. Dawson Edwards.
I would like to say I hope that people can stop getting derailed by terminology and really concentrate on what the meanings of things are. And so whether it's defund the police or community accountability or reallocating resources, all of those things are the same. And stop getting stuck on language and say, I don't like that. It's not for you to like, just get on board and let's do it in Louisville.
Ashanti.
Yeah, I just want to leave everyone with a task. I want everybody, if you can, to go to atticuscottforkentucky.com and sign on as a community co-sponsor for Breonna's Law, because we are going to have a big fight in January, and we need to show that we have thousands of supporters.
Excellent. And so to all of you all, I just want you to be encouraged. I don't think you get to do this work without sometimes being harassed, sometimes feeling down, sometimes feeling exhausted, or even frustrated by your own disagreements with people that you believe should be your ally. And I just want you to know, just keep fighting, keep going. We're all with you. We're watching you. We need you. You are inspirational. And I'm really honored to be here with you all. I think you are brilliant, brilliant people. And I am very thankful to have you in Louisville. And I needed this tonight, because this is my adopted home. And sometimes I wonder why. And then nights like this, I understand very clearly why I'm here. And so thank you all so much for inspiring me and for everything you do. And Ashanti, I'm looking forward to your career. Take care, everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sadiqa. Thank you all.
Absolutely. Thank you all.